Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm PPE and this is the Peso Pro episodes where we talk about money management tips and peso tricks. If you haven't done so yet, please hit the subscribe button below. First of all, thanks a lot for the 1,000 plus of you who have subscribed to the channel, and I hope you've learned a thing or two since we started this in early December 2020. Over the past 2 months or so, I am actually blessed to join a lot of engagements and even have one-on-one conversations with people I know, friends, colleagues, and even family members, and talk about personal finance more openly, which is sort of the whole reason why I started the channel to begin with. So I'm very happy, and in this video, I actually wanted to go through some questions I received over the past 2 months or so and try to share my thoughts on these questions so that you can learn a thing or two. Let's jump right in. The first question is all about emergency funds. And if you've watched my 8 pro steps towards financial independence video, emergency funds actually show up twice in the 8 pro steps, which means this is an integral, very important part in making sure that your finance journey is set up in really good foundations. This question talks about how do you actually compute for the amount of emergency fund that you need. If you watch the video on the 8 pro steps towards financial independence and a separate video on emergency funds, I talk about emergency fund in 2 ways. Number 1 is to set up a starter emergency fund of about 50,000 pesos. While 50,000 pesos will not get you to as far as maybe financial independence, or that can even just mean maybe a couple of nights at the hospital, the 50,000 is a good starting point, especially if you don't have one set up yet. The second way I think about emergency funds is to set up an emergency fund equivalent to 6 to 12 months worth of your expenses every month, or for simplicity, use your net take-home pay as a basis. Again, there's no hard rule on what emergency fund number you should maintain, but think about it this way. Let's say you have a net take-home pay of 50,000, but you really spend maybe 30,000 on needs every month, meaning that 20,000 probably goes into savings or maybe investments or maybe some wants or like a shopping spree or a trip to the movies or things that you can actually live without. Take those away and settle with a 30,000 number as the basis for your emergency fund. I would personally tell you to go for 6 months first. In this case, that's 30,000 times 6, reaching to a total of 180,000. Set that up first so that you have at least a 6-month cushion, meaning if you lose your job or if something happens as an emergency, you have about 6 months of living expenses in your bank stashed somewhere that you can pull immediately and very easily so that you are covered at least for 6 months while you get your bearings straight and try to normalize your life. Now, the best advice is for you to actually build an emergency fund worth 12 months of your necessities every month. And this is probably highlighted by the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, where we've actually seen that maybe financial distress can go beyond 6 months. And right now, we're well over a year into this pandemic and things haven't really gotten back to the way it was. So 12 months may seem like a lot. In our example, it would be 12 months times 30,000 or a total of 360,000. What I would suggest for those who are struggling to get to this number, start with the starter emergency fund first at 50,000 before looking at high interest debt. Then follow step 4 of the 8 pro steps and build towards a 6-month emergency fund, and you can identify other sources to eventually get to 12 months worth. Your risk profile will decide the number of months that you actually want to keep in the emergency fund. The second question is related to the first one, which is asking about once you have the emergency fund, where do you put it in? The general suggestion would be to put your emergency fund into a high-yielding savings account where you will have access to your money almost immediately or at most within a day or 2. Again, this is an emergency, so you really cannot really plan for it as to when it will happen. So having that liquidity in the funds is going to be a very critical factor. Now, The best options that you currently have in the market would be digital banks that will give you anywhere between 2.5% to 4% per year in interest, which beats all of the other banks from traditional savings accounts perspective. Some people also want to put a portion of their emergency funds into money market instruments that don't have lock-in periods. These can be good, especially if you have the ease of withdrawing it from that account very easily and you don't put everything into it, because that may be a bit more difficult to execute versus a savings account. For me personally, I put all of my emergency funds in digital banks like CIMB via GSave and ING. On to the next phase. The third question is now actually talking about after you've set up the emergency fund, maybe had a couple of insurance policies under your name, what should you do next? I assume that as of this stage, you've also paid off any high interest debts. These can be credit card debts or consumer debts like personal loans or even borrowings from other people. Once you have that out of the way, then we're now into investment stage. The next thing I would suggest for you to worry about would be the 2 investing steps in the 8 Pro steps. This is investing a portion of your pay, about 15 to 20% into retirement, and also saving up for milestones like a wedding, tuition fee for your children, or any major purchases that you may have. As to which types of vehicles you choose for these different purposes, I strongly suggest that you watch the live streams on investing, which I will link to in the box right here, and will put links in the description box below, so that you can actually think through how do you manage your investment portfolio and be open to different kinds of investments that you can choose from. One of the most common questions I've actually been getting, quite surprisingly, are questions on Peso money market funds. And I think this is really brought about by money market funds being now very accessible because they're actually on offer within the GCash app. If you go to GCash and click on Invest Money, currently as of the filming of this video, you will see some options, but the one that you can actually just select right now is a Peso money market fund from Atram. There are different funds which we will talk to in a future video, because now GCash is broadening the offerings for GInvest into other funds as well. Now that aside, a Peso money market fund typically invests in time deposits, cash equivalents, or in some cases, bonds from corporations or the government. This question was asking about, is a Peso money market fund actually a good idea, because the person wasn't able to see a lot of growth in these money market funds. The learning in this question would be to understand what kinds of funds do you invest in, and trying to understand where are these funds investing your money into. Again, funds can be a variety of different things. There can be funds that invest in stocks, or invest in bonds, or a combination of both. There are also funds that will invest in time deposits or bonds and other securities. So understanding the underlying assets of the funds is very critical when you choose a specific fund that you will put your money against, so that you can expect a certain amount of return when you look for performance. Again, the money market funds are placed in relatively safe instruments, and that's why one, based on its averages in the past, can only expect to get maybe a range of 1 to 3% per year. This can be a good option though for emergency funds, as we talked in the previous point. This question may be one of those that are very recurring, so I hope to be able to help on this one. This question really asks on what is better, investing in mutual funds or investing in individual stocks. Now, each of them have their own pros and cons. I actually talk about this in part in the different types of investments video, which will be linked to in the description box below, but will also paste the thumbnail right here so you can check that out right after. The main difference is that in mutual funds, you're technically buying into the fund and buying everything that the fund invests in. So if that fund invests in maybe 30 or 50 stocks, then that's exactly what you're buying every time you put money into that fund. What you get is a composite amount or a value per asset held in that fund. The concept of the net asset value per unit, or the NAVPU, which you will probably see if you read all of these mutual fund documents, those are the price of the fund as of a given point in time. The great thing about mutual funds is that they are managed by a professional fund manager, so you actually don't have to worry about your own diversification or you actually choosing stocks. In individual stocks, for example, what you will do is really now target a specific company and try to understand the fundamentals of the company and buy that share price on whatever is being sold in the market. This gives you higher flexibility on which types of investments or which companies you buy into, but obviously you also run the risk of choosing the wrong company or buying at the wrong price. Each one of them will have their own pros and cons. In the most obvious case, mutual funds probably would have a lower return historically if you compare to maybe growth stocks in the US or stocks that have doubled or tripled their value in the past few months or years. However, that being low doesn't always mean that it's a bad choice, because that had diversification embedded into the fund, which really kept you safe if some of the other stocks weren't performing as well. If you invest on individual stocks, then you're really putting faith in the company that you placed money in, that company will continue to do well. If that company does not, then the chances are you will have a higher loss on the value as well. It really depends on your risk profile, so I strongly suggest that you understand what the fund invests in, and if you are choosing to do individual stocks, understand what the company's plans are and really try to do your own due diligence before you invest. A good way would be to diversify and don't put everything in one basket, so you can have even further diversification in your investment portfolio. This one often comes up in Q&As, which is asking about the insurance policy that comes with an investment, or more commonly known as the VUL, or the variable unit linked policies that are offered by almost all insurance companies. Is it really beneficial, and is this really better than just buying a term insurance, which is really, for in layman's terms, really just insurance itself, meaning just life insurance, no frills, no other benefits? The main difference is that a VUL would typically be more expensive than a term insurance, because a VUL also has a lot more in it. It would probably have additional coverages for accidents, and maybe some would even have riders on critical illness or even hospitalization benefits. And it also comes with an investment option or investment rider that comes with a policy, so that you actually earn a portion back as you keep the funds in there for the longer term. Simply put, it's technically a life insurance policy that has a mutual fund attached to it. Now, the answer can be very, very different for different types of people. My personal take on this is that you have to assess what do you need. If you're in it for the benefits of like critical illness coverages, hospitalization benefits, and the life insurance itself, then it may actually make sense for you to get a VUL. In most cases, this also helps the policy holder, because you don't have to worry about getting multiple products to actually meet the same objective. You're getting one package product and you get multiple values from that same policy. However, if you are not looking for those kinds of policy add-ons, riders, remember that when you buy a VUL, you're buying an insurance policy first with an investment component tacked on it, and not the other way around. Regardless of what people will tell you, a VUL is not investment first. The investment portion is only tacked on top, and while it really will give you returns over the long term, it's probably not the best way for you to invest a lot or maybe all of your money into. Because at the end of the day, the main purpose of the VUL is to cover you first and give you some returns later. The last question I'll share today, which is probably one of the more common questions that I've heard, especially for people who have watched the 8 Pro Steps Towards Financial Independence, is asking, okay, if I'm still building my emergency fund, can I actually start investing also, please? I don't want to be FOMO'd out of Bitcoin and all of the other growth stocks. What I actually answered to this question is that I learned this the hard way. I also was in your shoes when I was trying to build my emergency fund. I wasn't there yet, not even at the 6 months range. I also started putting in money on investments. And there came a point in time where there was actually a need to withdraw money for an emergency case, and I didn't have enough in the spare funds to actually answer to the emergency, which led me to trying to think, okay, what do I do? Do I sell some of the investments that I have for whatever price is in the market? And to me, it sort of worked out because the market was very good at that time. But imagine if this happened during COVID. If you recall, around March or April in 2020, the stock market took a deep dive. Even cryptocurrencies also took a very big plunge. What if you needed the amount of money, especially at that time when the lockdown hit, when people lost their jobs, or probably when maybe a family member was hospitalized at the height of COVID? What you would have done if you didn't have the emergency fund set aside is you would probably have sold your investments for whatever price they were, and you would have actualized maybe a 50 to 60% loss during that time. Creating the emergency fund has a reason, and that actually protects you from making rash decisions, or maybe sometimes really just avoiding a position where you don't have any choice on making bad investment choices, or even worse, maybe trying to get into debt just to answer your problem. So my short answer to this is what you can do is to focus on building your emergency funds first to at least 6 months, and then try to maybe lessen the emergency fund build up to your 12 months and start learning investing as you go. But only do so once you have 6 months of emergency fund already set aside. If you're not there yet, I would essentially tell you to focus on emergency fund building and eliminating high interest debt, because no matter how well you are in your investment skills, or no matter how lucky you got in different stocks, these two fundamental items in your journey will really help set you up for success in the long term. And while it can be very difficult to tune out the noise and tune out all of the things that you hear on social media, I really urge you to stay the course and follow the steps sequentially, because I've learned it the hard way, and I hope that you learn from my mistakes. Those are just some of the questions that I got that I hope was helpful in your journey as well. If you have more questions, feel free to comment them down in the comment section below, and we'll see if there's good enough demand for the topic. We may even create a video on your question, and we'll feature that comment in the future videos to come. For now, these have been some questions I've heard. Thank you once again for supporting the channel. If you haven't done so yet, hit subscribe and like, and the notification bell so that you're notified when new videos are up. Thank you, and I'll see you again.